good morning again, and we will start the first panel because we thought at least we are local, so we can be sure that we will be here when the conference starts, no matter if there's a typhoon or anything. So our panel is about connectivity and networks between islands, and we have 4 presenters. So I will not give long introductions, but rather give the floor to the first presenter, which is my colleague, Kyungjae. And then we will follow with my presentation and CHIYA and Simona later on. So we will all focus on issues in Japan. So I think as a first panel, this will also give you a little bit of an introduction about island research in Japan.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Kyungjae Jang from Hiroshima University, and I'm glad to be here, International Conference on Small Island Cultures. So as a first presentation, today I'll be talking about the new conceptual framework in island tourism. The title is Connectivity and Realms of Memory in Island Tourism. And the aim of this presentation is to suggest the choke point as a new conceptual framework, so considering the island tourism. So it's mainly the conceptual research, and I will also introduce 2 cases related to choke point and tourism. So first, I'd like to talk about the choke point as a framework. The choke point is basically defined as a relatively narrow waterway and probably being closed up to shipping, whether commercial or the military way. So these are the primary and secondary choke point in the world. So considering in Japan, so these 2 choke points of Hormuz and Malacca is so significant and or important because almost all oil from these 2 choke points of Hormuz and Malacca Strait. Among these many choke points, so today I'll focus on this choke point of Korean Strait between the Korea and Japan. And these are previous studies of choke points. So you can see these 3 the topic of maritime power and economic roles and environmental study. It's not a chronological, but the many previous researches about choke point was focused on this military importance and global supply chains as economic roles. But we found that there are another perspective to use the choke point as a framework in the environmental study in 2012 and 2015. So these thoughts emphasize the role of choke point not just for the military or the economic news, but they emphasize choke point is more complex than geopolitical positioning. So we motivated from this concept and made new the concept of choke point, the focus on more the cultural and historical use. So we suggest the choke point as a passage where historical and cultural resources are connected and gathered, and choke point's distinctive history and culture in the multi-layer can serve as tourism resources. And also, we want to emphasize the significant role of soft power, particularly to focus on the popular culture. So with this concept, we'd like to consider the choke point of soft power as a framework of tourism, island tourism, both in academic and practical level. Then I'd like to introduce the 2 cases about choke point and the tourism. So first is the Japan heritage, the border island Iki and Tsushima and Goto. So first, I'd like to introduce about the Japan heritage. The Japan heritage is a new heritage system made in Japanese government in the 2015. And this border island is one of the first Japan heritage recognized in April the 2015. And the reason, the Japan Heritage emphasized the story than the intangible, the sites or the building. So it has their own story in the Japan Heritage. And the reason of this Japan Heritage border islands are the Tsushima City, and Iki and Goto City, and Shinkamiguto Town. In this map. So this story of Japan Heritage shares the ancient time and the medieval times. The diplomatic relationships, and geographically, this story of Japan Heritage in the choke point, which we also suggested. So also this Japan Heritage is serialized type, means that these four administrations registered in the same the site, and also they emphasize that actually this border island Japan Heritage was applied in using the bottom-up method. This bottom-up method means from the city level to the national level. But actually we found that in the interview, so it was actually the top-down style from the national level to the city level. So the story of this Japan Heritage border island emphasizes the international exchange in the ancient time, and also the relationship between Korean Peninsula and Japan in ancient time, and also the story it has the diplomatic relations between the Japan and the Korean Peninsula and the China. And you can realize that this story only emphasizes the specific time of ancient and diplomatic time. So the more dramatic story, the warfare in the medieval age or the modern age is erased in this story. So we focus this story, and I will talk about our findings. So in the summary of the presentation and the next slide. But interesting point is the stance. The emphasizing that ancient times relationship will have changed in the 3 years after the registration. So I will introduce the book published by Nagasaki Prefecture. The title is Japan Heritage Border Island, the history of trade, exchange, and the tension. So we focused on this tone of tension because actually in original story of Japan Heritage, there's no expression or there was no story about tension in original story. But 3 years later, they changed their stance. So we suppose the one reason there's no evidence, but one reason might be the popular culture of this manga. So at that time, 2018, the Nagasaki Prefecture has started the tourism promotion with using this manga. The title is Angolmoa. So we suppose this manga contents influence the changing their stance. So considering time, I will summarize the case number 1. So the Japan Heritage made the possible the cooperation through the civil legislation, but also the story, many story was selected, and the stories mainly emphasize the current border as line, because the reason they emphasize the ancient times relationship is the Japanese government basically want to avoid the possible the conflict between the Japan and other countries like Korea and China. Also, this story emphasizes the border island Japan Heritage as Japan's furthest island, and it makes this island as eternal, the remote island. So let's go back to the choke point and tourism. So we are considering the choke point is the useful conceptual framework, because in the choke point, so we can consider the region as decentralized and debordering, as a whole space, not just consider the nowadays border. When considering this choke point or Korean Strait, one of the most dramatic stories is the Genko and medieval the warfare and this choke point as a war field. So I'd like to introduce the second case of the Angolmoa Genko Gasenki. It's a manga and the promotion of tourism in this area of Tsushima and Iki Island. So first, the Genko is a Mongolian invasion of Japan in the 1274 and the 1281. So it was the international warfare in the medieval age and also erased in the Japan heritage stories. And motivated by this warfare, Genko, so one manga have publishing by the author, the Nanahiko Takagi. It's a serialized manga from the 2013 and motivated by the Mongolian invasion illustration called Moko Shuraya Kotoba, this one. So after publishing this manga, so there were many the tourism promotions in the Nagasaki prefecture, particularly Tsushima city and Iki city and Matsuura city, as you see. So mainly there were 4 the tourism the promotion, like official Angolmoa tour, the 2 times of tour, and there was also Genko summit in 3 years ago, and also last year there was a Mongolian invasion temporarily of the 3 cities. So what we want to emphasize is all these 4 tourism promotion is motivated from the manga. The tourism promotion's trigger was manga. So it is a poster of the tourism promotion. So this left side too is a poster of the official tour of manga and also Genko Summit poster. And the right hand side is a poster of the step rally which held in the last year. 3 minutes, okay. So this slide is from the newspaper article of Nagasaki newspaper in about the tour, second time of tour. So there were 28 men and women from the 8 prefectures and Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto that participated in this tour. So it was the tourists can join the local omatsuri in the shrine about the battlefield and experience a traditional event related to Genko or the warfare. And also there was a Genko summit in the 3 years ago in the Matsuura city, and about the 350 attendants participated this summit. And there was also the talk show of the Nanahiko Takagi, also of Angolmoa, the hold as a special event. And after that, the declaration of exchange by the 3 mayors also have had hold. And the last case, the last event is the stamp rally of the cities, sharing the choke point. The number of participants was 467 for the 4 cities crossings event. I have only 1 minute, so I'd like to conclude my presentation. So in this presentation, the idea of choke point in island tourism I introduced about as the new conceptual framework in the island tourism. So what we want to emphasize is the role of popular culture when we are considering the choke point in the tourism. So popular culture functions as a guide to the local attraction, and it also creates the cultural affinity. The cultural affinity is a term suggested by UNWTO in last year with Netflix. Means that the popular cultural form increase the interest of the culture and place and even the language. And also the popular culture help in the demilitarization of the memory, because the popular culture is usually fictional form, and the quite the soft type than the actual history. So, okay, so it's time. And these are the references for the presentation. And thank you for your attention. This is all my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have concluded for questions. So the floor is open to comments and questions from anybody. Yes?
I have a very short question.
Could you just maybe introduce your name also so we know who you are?
My name is Takayoshi from the Yamamura University. And a very short question. You said that the other islands are in this Japanese heritage. And my question is, there is a small island, a group of islands just north of Koto Island or Ojita Island. It also has the same history, but it's not in the Japan Heritage series. Is there a reason for that? Do you know?
You mean Ojita Island in the Koto area? Yeah. So it's designated as the World Heritage, right? So basically, the Japan heritage is consisted by the story. Then perhaps the Ojika is not in the Japan heritage is because the sharing the common story about the relationships in. But perhaps Ojika is in the Japan heritage, you know. Also, Ojika included the Japan heritage part, right? I mean, the memory of the relation between the Japan and the China, isn't it?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I was surprised that it wasn't in this one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyungjae Johnson. Is the popular culture primarily for Japanese tourism, or does it also transcend crossover to South Korea as well?
Please repeat your question again.
Is the popular culture only the Japanese, or is the popular culture also consumed in South Korea?
In this presentation, the popular culture means that included not just for the popular culture made in Japan. So there is another case, and I did introduce in today's presentation, and there's also a game based on this warfare in the medieval age called The Ghost of Tsushima, and the game is made by the American productions. It's called the Sucker Punch. And also, so the popular culture in this presentation means they're not just made in Japan, from the many countries, like South Korea is possible.
Because Tsushima is a very popular place for Korean tourists.
Yeah.
Even day tourists. Just going around and tell us.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but actually, one of the problem in Tsushima tourism was so many Korean tourists, and they made the over-tourism situation to Tsushima. So now Tsushima city to try to make another tourism resources to attract not just from the South Korea and from the other tourists from the many other countries, but mainly focused on the European and America. So they, in their tourism plan made in 2 years ago, they made a plan to how to use the game as a new tourism resources to attract the tourists from the other countries other than Korea. Yeah.
One last question. Yes, short one, please.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm working in the Yamamura University. So actually, after tomorrow, we will give the presentation about this Shoto in several islands. This area also has Japan heritage and also serial type. So in our research, this Shoto Japan heritage program has a difficulty. So which is how to say how to connect each village, each island, and to communicate with each other. So my question is, how about this area? So how do you communicate with each island, and which islands organize this project, this Japan Heritage Program?
So thank you for your question. So perhaps your presentation and research shares the point of our research. So in this, the Japan, not just this case, I mean in this case, the trigger was a manga, and actually Matsuura city was is in the center of this project. So what we want to emphasize is the role of the popular culture. So it's not suitable for the case or Japan heritage case, but sometimes the popular culture can make and trigger and make and contribute to make the connectivity to the cities or the administration.
Okay, thank you very much. And we will move to the next presentation, so thank you. And I think the next presentation will be mine.
Yeah.
No, not this one. That's CHIYA. The next one. Yeah.
Command and okay.
Okay, so the last question I think really connects to our panel topic, which is how can we connect islands? So I will talk about cycling tourism as a connection tool. So first of all, you have already been to the Seto Inland Sea area, so you know it's a very diverse area. It features historical port towns and traditional cultural heritage like Itsukushima Shrine. It has modern cultural heritage like art, as you will see in Naoshima. It has, of course, a beautiful sea, and it has the bridges that cross it and the sunsets that come with it. But it has also been an area that has been industrialized and urbanized for a long time, and we can see landscape like this. So how is this, first of all, the whole Seto Inland Sea connected? Since 2016, it has been actually branded as one area by a DMO, and this DMO is considered one of the most successful examples in Japan, promoting a large area with a common image, and they also have investment in tourism industries promoted by the DMO. So the DMO promotes the Seto Inland Sea mainly with three topics, which is cruising, cycling, and art. But as we already saw, the Seto Inland Sea is very diverse, so these three topics promoted by the DMO doesn't reflect the diversity of islands, which could offer much more to tourists, which could be like hiking, flower fields, traditional food, traditional culture, free schools in abandoned school buildings, once again port towns, special types of fishing, just relaxation, wild animals and not so wild animals. So we have a large variety of tourism resources, but of course each island cannot brand itself easily. So that is also because islands are very dependent. And one special feature of the Seto Inland Sea probably is that most islands can easily reach a city. You can reach a city on one of the main islands from most of the islands. And that makes life on the islands very dependent on the cities, because people go to the nearest city for work, for education, for medical care services and goods, rather than to the neighboring island. And on top of that, islands in Japan have received a lot of capital support for revitalization from the central government. So this means connection between islands are probably even weaker in the Seto Inland Sea than they would be in island chains that are more remote. And we can see that they are peripheralized in political, economic, social, and communicative dimensions. Recently, an influx of new residents to islands has put the focus of if they can create networks, but they only really network to a limited degree. So our question in this panel is, can island networks counteract peripheralization? And I will look at cycle tourism as a network trigger because cycle requires regional cooperation for the infrastructure. It contributes to local transport as cyclists use local transportation. They bring a lot of new business chances and they stabilize seasonality because they cycle in different seasons than there's three as tourists. So I will compare two destinations in the Seto Inland Sea area. This picture actually is from November, so you can see it was perfect cycling season, but there would not be any tourists looking at the sea or coming to the sea in November. So I do swim in the Seto Inland Sea until October, but most people in Japan don't. So we look at two lines of islands that are famous as cycling destinations. And the most famous one is the Shimana Mikaido, which was constructed along a highway connecting Honshu and Shikoku across 6 islands. And the highway was constructed with separate cycling lanes on all the bridges. And it opened originally as a road for daily life to connect the islands and make life on the islands more convenient. But since 2010, leisure cycling has become very popular in Japan. It had not been up to then, partly due to the mountainous structure of the country. But we have seen a cycling boom for more than 10 years now. And international media have also become interested in this route. So now we can say the cycling brand really has connected these islands. It has also led to a diversification of tourism along these islands. We now see different facilities like glamping and dolphin parks or luxury hotels. And the Shimana Mikaido, which is this area, is now expanding to nearby other areas, the Yumeshima Kaido, and the other case I'm looking at, the Tobishima Kaido. So my question here is, how has cycling helped to create a coherent image for the Shimana Mikaido Islands? And during this process, what problems have been faced? And then we have this one call in our area. Can we extend the island network from there through the cycle network? And can these island networks really counteract peripheralization? What I was trying to do for this presentation is to summarize my research in this area spanning 20 years in 15 minutes, and obviously that doesn't work. So please excuse that my presentation will be kind of maybe a little bit overcrowded. So I've been trying to summarize the results from the observations and the surveys we did from the aspect of cycling as a trigger for island networks. So just to give you an idea of the number of tourists to the Shimana Mikaido, we can see it opened in 1999, then the numbers fell, and from 2010 onwards they are increasing because of the cycling boom. Cooperation along the Shimana Mikaido started with the opening events, and a promotion council was founded that has been working until recently. But it really took off from 2013 with the events for the 15-year anniversary. And then it was connected to a further highway up into the mountain areas, the Setouchi DMO, and we also have a Japan heritage in this area, Murakami Kaizoku, helped to create wider networks. And finally, we have a DMO just for Shimanami now for 6 years. So I will look at 4 parts in the construction of the network. First of all is structural element. Important is that by now many towns on the islands have been merged into 2 cities, which makes the cooperation much easier. And the Shimana Mikaido is easily accessed from the Honshu side through very frequent train services. Also, one of the 2 entrance points, because the road goes across, is Onomichi City, which is already a touristic city and offers a variety of accommodation. The prefecture has also created a common structure with a blue line all along the cycling course. Tourism industries have really developed in a quite diverse way. So they started rental bicycles from the beginning, but recently we see also international brands opening shops renting bicycles, and we see new types of bicycles like these lemon ones, because Shimana Mikaido is famous for lemon production. So basically they are promoting the agricultural products together with the bicycles, so we can see unique developments. We also have the first cycling hotel in Japan, in Onomichi. We have luggage service, specialized maps, books and tours, and cycle oasis where people can repair their bicycles and have a rest and receive all kind of information about cycling, and a large event held every 2 years with more than 6,000 participants from all around the world. So we can see that in the more than 20 years that Shimanami Kaido has been there, it has really led to innovation in cycling tourism and a lot of new industries. As for the cyclists themselves, we did some surveys and they showed us that we really have a variety of uses and purposes. We have the really hard cyclists who come all the time, who have their sport bicycle, who just run through. But we also have the people who come there for the family outing, using the rental cycles and so on. And they all have different characteristics. So the important point for the network really is the image elements. How was the image of Shimanami created? And we can see that here the prefectural strategies have been very important, because in around 2010, both Ehime Prefecture and Hiroshima Prefecture elected new governors who put a lot of emphasis on tourism, and in the case of Ehime on cycling as a concept for the whole prefecture. So both of these concepts were made by the prefecture, and Shimanami Kaido became the kind of symbol project for both of these strategies. Shimanami Kaido has also very actively appealed to the international audience. So they have been approaching Taiwan and a Taiwanese bicycle maker who is actively in this area, and other target markets like Australia or France because of the Tour de France. Another important point is an MPO that started from creating cycling routes and maps with local people, and has since created different types of cycle infrastructure like guest houses, services, home pages, and information. So they provide the practical information for the cyclists by cyclists, which makes the information very usable. The information usually provided in Japan by the governments, local governments, is not very useful for cyclists originally. So this MPO is an important factor in creating a common experience also among residents along the Shimanami Kaido that cycling is an important sector could become an important sector in the local industry. And then the international media started putting attention on Shimanami Kaido when CNN published this about Japan's Shimanami Kaido, one of the world's most incredible bike routes, in 2015. And it's been in the Lonely Planet and so on. However, Shimanami Kaido is also facing its problems. There were problems between even the two prefectures in the beginning. There are still problems in the way tourists travel. There's a balance needed between the needs of tourists and residents. The lack of public transport between islands makes it difficult for cyclists also to go around in a flexible way. And we have many new residents coming in because it's possible to do new business. But most of the activities originate actually from the two cities, like the MPO sitting in Imabari and many of the other actors in Onomichi, rather than from the islands themselves. The Tobishima Kaido is different than Shimanami because it doesn't go across the main island. It stops at one smaller island. It has no separate cycling lane, but because there's very little traffic along these islands, it is possible to cycle in a very relaxed way, and there are some cultural resources like the historic town of Mitarai that some of you visited yesterday, so I think by car you drove across this route. So access is much worse because it sits far away from the major urban centers, but it can be accessed from Shimanami Kaido by ferry. There is a promotion council, but it does have very few activities, and most of it is now integrated in Kure City, which is an industrial and port city which until recently didn't have much interest in tourism. So we see very few tourism industries along the Shimanami Kaido. There are only 4 cycling stations, and recently one business from the Shimanami Kaido has been expanding into this area with a new rental cycle, but originally there is only one rental bicycle service. And the yearly event is also much smaller, and Kure City and then the MPO from Shimanami Kaido are providing the information maps. Yeah, I know. So the connections to the Shimanami Kaido can be seen in the behavior of the tourists. Many cyclists enter from Shimanami Kaido by ferry, and the MPO in Shimanami Kaido is also promoting Tobishima Kaido as a kind of side trip. And we also have the regional support staff the Chiki Okoshi Kyoryokutai on all of these islands, and they have created their own network to promote life on Tobishima. But Kure City itself really just recently started a new tourism promotion plan. That plan starts with a chapter on why do we need tourism now, showing that nobody in Kure up to now really thought that we do need tourism. They do need it now because their main company is going to be closed, the large steel combinat, so that will change the economic structure. So here, along Tobishima Kaido, each village has a different economic structure: agriculture, fishery, culture, and so port city. And there's not much support from Kure City for the network, as Kure City's tourism is focusing on the Navy port. It has a very different tourist profile for the little tourism it has. And so the residents also, because many of them are of very high age, the aging is much more proceeding than in Shimanami Kaido, have little interest in tourism as an economic activity, and the difficulty to access have led to the fact that in Tobishima, we have much less of the elements of a cycling tourism. Although it's only a 10-year difference of when the route was opening, but even if you think of that, the process is going much slower than in the Shimanami Kaido. And some of the reasons is there is not the regional promotion by the prefecture or by a large city, and there is the lack of the access and the lack of the regional initiatives and the lack of cohesion between the villages and towns. So we can say that the cycle tourism that we have seen can obviously create island networks under certain conditions, but that these networks, as in Shimanami Kaido, still probably depend a lot on the entrance points of the cycle roads and on the regional strategies backing them up. That's the literature, and thank you for your attention. And we have time for a few questions, so anybody please. No question.
Everybody understand?
Well, some of you have seen the area, so maybe something from that. Yes? Thank you.
Steve Foster, Hokkaido University, Toronto. I was wondering about just the electronic assist bikes that made, because that's new technology, and I've seen that implemented really well in kind of cycling situations like this, where you have longer distances between things and maybe diversified terrain.
Yeah, there are, on the Shimanami Kaido, there are now some of the rental cycles do provide electronic assistance for a higher price. So it is starting. But it's going to be like one segment of the market. Many cyclists, of course, like to bring their own bicycles, so then it would be sport bikes, and the electric bicycles are more expensive, so not everybody will go for those if it's only for a short time or so. But they have been introducing them. They are less important here because, I mean, there are the bridges, but they are not so, otherwise it's not as hilly as the rest of Japan. So many cycling routes in Japan, you look at them, you think like anybody who goes cycling here must be completely crazy because they really go like this. So, but it's starting, of course. Yes?
I'm Shen Chen from Taiwan University. Because I'm a heavy user of gym, and I really enjoy the cycling standing classes. And many of my standing teachers, they come to Japan to do the cycling. So I wonder, in terms of the tourists, the quote-unquote tourists, the cyclists, do they have any networks among themselves? Because they are different type of tourists.
Well, that would go into SNS. You're thinking about SNS networks among the tourists. I am sorry, I'm not researching on SNS, and I'm not using it heavily myself, so I would not know, but I'm sure there are. So if you check on it quickly, there is a lot of information available, like people writing about their experience of cycling it. You can find if you check cycling Shimanami, you will see lots of people writing about their experiences. So I'm sure there are these networks about people doing that.
Thank you.
Yes?
Last question.
Yes.
I'm Fred Schumann from University of Guam. And I just want to follow up, there was a mention about Taiwan, and also in your presentation you mentioned that there was cooperation from industry in Taiwan, and I believe that's Giant.
Yes.
Right, and I think there's a store
Yes.
there at one of the starting points. I'm just curious, I know this may not have much to do with small islands directly, but what about Japan's bicycle industry, and what role does is the Japanese bicycle manufacturing industry or companies, are they playing a role? Because this is a really big.
Yeah, well, the main bicycle manufacturer in Japan is Shimano, and I think they are a sponsor of the main event, but I haven't seen them as engaged as Giant is. Shimano, my own experience, but I have not researched it properly, is they are more oriented on the export market, because the leisure cycling and sports cycling took off in Japan so late. So we found out, for example, parts for Shimano bicycles are easier to get in Germany than in Japan sometimes. So I think they are gradually getting involved. And then we have these smaller companies now that create the specialized bicycles on a very small scale. So it's a new type of bicycle industry creating, it's like Miyajima beer, like local beer. Now we get the local bicycles, which I think is a very interesting trend also.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think it's time to go on to the next presentation, which will be CHIYA, who is just running around with the microphone. So thank you very much.
Hi, and good morning. My name is CHIYA, and I'm a PhD student with Professor Funck. Before I came here, just a quick background. I was an orchestra conductor for more than 10 years in Europe and around the world, and I decided to put down my stick and stop waving and do something for, well, just do something more interesting, I guess. Yep. And today I'll be presenting on the impact of classical music festivals on the island communities. It's actually a review and future research directions. Right, and today I'll be, of course, speaking about the purpose, the methods, and the findings. So there has been a proliferation of creative measures in Japan, where there have been quite a few more classical music festivals on islands in the recent few years. Of course, there have been that has been going on for 20 years or so, and they are growing in popularity because it's quite easy and less complex to organize a classical music festival as compared to rock and folk, because we don't need a large venue. We can actually use something like this. We don't need speakers, we don't need microphones, and it's very compact. And somehow classical music is very popular in Japan. And also they receive quite a lot of funding, especially from many foundations, especially like the Japan Foundation and the Japan Music Foundation. However, there is a lack of specific research on the social cultural aspects of classical music festivals, especially on rural places, communities. So I hope to use this study to contribute and encourage more research between the performing arts and social sciences and humanities. Before we move on, I would like to define Western Classical Music Festival as a social affair that serves to promote and preserve Western classical music through a series of well-organized events such as masterclasses, workshops, and performances as well as act as an agent for cultural exchange, capability development, which is like master classes, and community building through a shared passion for classical music. I also want to go on to add on that classical music festivals feature a genre of music that is composed in the classical way, but they might also include composers which are non-Western, so like say Japanese composers, and they might also feature modern day genres like pop music but performed on sort of Western instruments. To understand why I've undertaken this study, there are also several problems identified in the field of classical social musicology and geography, as the impacts are not really well classified and not specific to rural island communities. And as mentioned before, there has been limited research on classical music festivals. Did you know that Japan has the highest number of classical music festivals in Asia? And it is only second behind the UK for classical music festivals per inhabitant. Yeah, so it's very interesting. While there are currently 81 major classical music festivals in Japan, most of them are held on the mainland, but still there are 5 held annually on the peripheral islands in Japan. There are no studies on the impact, or well, the social cultural impact of any one of these festivals. I'm guessing as a classical musician, there has been some sort of barrier that some researchers do not want to go towards classical music. It might be defined as high art, or they sometimes say classical musicians are snobs. We just don't want to work with people. Well, that's not true. I'm here, so I hope to be the one that's starting something new. And the aim of this study is very simple. What are the social cultural impacts of classical music festivals on rural island communities? A 5-step procedure was used to compile and analyze and synthesize the literature. So first, related keywords were properly established, and different combinations of these keywords were used. Next, the search was performed on Science Direct, Scopus, Web of Science, and Wiley, and the initial search yielded 2,649 articles, after which I applied my first level inclusion criteria, which is papers limited to the English language, and the following research areas of musicology, geography, tourism, event management, social sciences, and humanities. This was done through manual selection of abstracts. I actually read through all 2,649 abstracts, and I selected 48 articles. I then applied my second level inclusion criteria, which is papers covering music festivals, social cultural impacts, and I finally selected 30 articles. A final sample of 30 articles published from 22 different journals and books was selected. The Journal of Rural Studies presented the highest number of articles. 10 articles focused on music festivals, 8 articles had an emphasis on classical music festivals and social cultural impacts, but not in rural areas, and only 1 was related to classical music festivals in island communities. This is in Orkney, it's in Scotland. Unfortunately, the research objectives were not present in any of the papers selected. So what I did from here was to analyze the 30 papers and come up with a list of keywords of the social cultural impacts of music festivals I identified. So these were the keywords I basically extracted from the papers. They were analyzed and coded into categories and subsequently into themes of social sustainability. And the themes selected were resilience, resourcefulness, and well-being. I selected these 3 themes because based on the initial outcomes, these outcomes, they seem to fit most into the 3 themes. Also, because there were no papers identified, I decided to also identify some gaps using the TCCM framework. And under theory, social capital and resilience is the most used theory in defining social sustainability of rural islands. Each of them in 17.5% of the papers, but there have been the theories between classical music and islands were under-researched in the literature. So this is one thing that I think is a huge gap. Classical music studies are usually in history and let's say performance art. So there hasn't been a lot of theories between classical music and sociology or let's say geography also. In terms of context, no papers which examine classical music festivals on peripheral islands as well as rural places in Japan were found. Most studies were conducted in Australia and of course across Europe. Only 26.6% of the papers have an emphasis on classical music festivals. Most of them were on rock music, folk music. I guess folk music has the most power to actually bring people together because it's very, people actually make music together, whereas classical music, people just sit there and they keep quiet. So it's interesting to study how people interact during classical music festivals and how it affects the community itself. And like I mentioned, only one study examined classical music festivals in the context of islands, but it's focused on the economic implications. And future research on these festivals and social cultural sustainability is encouraged. Characteristics, as you've seen before, many of the impacts identified were interconnected, they're not distinct. Some of them were the same, just put in a different way. And so I hope with this study, by sort of classifying them into teams, I hope that there will be future studies to actually create a more organized framework to improve some future research on that, instead of people or authors writing the same impacts but just putting it in a new way. And finally, the methods were very well varied. 40% of the literature reviewed were qualitative, 23.3% quantitative. There were mixed methods too, but there were only one review of music and sustainability by Sasha Kagan, and so future studies could consider developing action research when examining the social cultural impacts of music festivals on island places, communities. I'm actually also doing action research on this, and I hope to contribute to any future studies. These are my references, and that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. So, questions from the floor, please, or comments? Yes? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Jens, and I'm from Lund University, PhD student. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I really encourage you to go out and study this with fieldwork.
Yes, I have. Yes, thank you.
Oh, you have. I find it very
recording in progress.
In some of the small island communities in Denmark, we have a similar phenomenon. But they are not a part of a cultural exchange program or a governmental program or a municipal program. They are the product of what we can call translocal belonging. It would be the product of second homeowners being so attached to the island community that they decide, okay, I cannot move here, I cannot contribute in a traditional way, but I will somehow make a cultural event and so on and so on. So there are many really interesting dimensions to this. It's more like a comment. I don't have.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Mike Evans, CBC, Okinawa in British Columbia. This is a similar question to Jens. I'm wondering about shifting the focus to the classical musicians and the networks, the very complex networks that they build, rather than classical a unique sort of approach to the question, but also in terms of either resilience, create the context or support context where those more complex networks create a more robust resilience.
Yes, I'm actually focusing on the community residents and the musicians that actually come back to do some performances rather than the festival goers and let's say tourism. Of course, there's some aspect of tourism, but my recent research is on residents and musicians who are born there, but they decided to come back. So it's something like what the first comment said, they have left, but they still feel some sort of belonging to that city and they want to contribute in some sort of way, and they come back. So that's the current fieldwork that I actually have.
Yes?
Last question.
Thank you, Amos Johnson. Why do you think classical festivals are so popular in Japan?
Okay, this I wanted to explain here, but there's not much time. There's actually a lot of reasons why. One of the main reasons that I found out through interviews is very interesting is that during the war, there's a lot of German and Italian music which was broadcasted in Japan, and that's why they have been listening to, let's say, Wagner and Italian music. And it has been incorporated into the schools systems. So they started to teach music from there. So this is one of the biggest reasons. But of course, it's also, there were many, I guess, from my research, it was the bands that started here, because there's a huge military aspect in Japan in the past. So there were military bands. And from then on, it grew into classical music too. So that's the two main things that came together, and classical music became so popular here. Yeah. In fact, if we included the other minor classical music festivals, that would be close to, my latest number is about 600 for both major and minor festivals. So minor being festivals done by high schools, colleges, and major being those which have professional musicians.
Okay, so thank you very much, and let's move on to the last speaker, which is also from Hiroshima University, my colleague Simona. Oh, you're presenting. I thought she's presenting, sorry. Okay, so it's more.
Hello, good morning again. I want to present early because I need to arrange all the food and dinner for everyone. Okay, as yesterday we traveled to Osaka Miyajima with 10 people. So my presentation is about the story from the new established international high school. Last year, we've been invited by the school to conduct a middle school English-based summer workshop. But it's not just a simple English workshop. We want it more artistic and also connect to local historical, geographic, and island elements. So probably most of you already know this. Japan's biggest issue, especially for its island communities, are the depopulation. This map demonstrates 16 years later, those are the areas will be completely wiped out from the map. So basically, most of the peripheral, what they call it, under this context. My fieldwork study covers 33 islands in this region, and my main study actually not related to education. My main study is about the identity transformation of the island, and also during the post-conference tour, actually we're going to my PhD study site in the eastern side of Simona Sea. Yesterday we got a one-day tour in the two islands, Osaka Miyajima and Osaka Miyajima. And also the recent publication are also focused on this area. But today I will want to focus on very special action-based participatory research at Osaka Kyungjae, the Hiroshima International Academy. Most of the population census for small island community, less than 500 people, more or less similar like this social structure. More than 2/3 of the population are aging people with a pension, what do we call them, pension population, because they're just 65 years old. Then, if you're looking at the news of Japan time back to 2019, there is a very interesting news catching my eyes. Japan is opening its new international high school in a very depopulated community, Osaka Kyungjae. And what this community is about, this island has nothing, no tourism attraction, not really interesting to visit, elderly people, abandoned farmland, but it has some certain charm. And suddenly 200 middle school kids arrive at this island with a lot of international teachers. I think some of you already talked to them yesterday. And the architect design is very advanced. Yeah, it's designed much better than my university, to be honest. This kind of campus I want to restart a middle school life again. So there is quite cool active learning activity. They have no classroom. All the class are DIY based on the needs of the topic of the class. So that's really cool. So averagely every year receive 40 students and also about 20 international students. They want to keep this ratio. And they have a regular IB curriculum, and also they have a social practice-based learning served in the community. This summer school, they already gave a thing. They want to promote not only peace education in Hiroshima, but also the SDG sustainability education, with the average age of those students are 13 to 15 years old, very young. So therefore, with my background as art research with the island studies, I create this special lecture for them. It's a deep mapping with the artist book. So it's not just the art craft making, it's also about mapping the knowledge of the community to your presentation. They don't use any computer digital device for their presentation. They use papers. All the kindergarten kids can use scissors to cut and DIY their unique style of their presentation. So this is the new way of presentation by hand. 3 mentors, also 3 of my co-authors. Dr. Simona, she focuses on island sustainability and local food system. She is a kind of a mentor and project advisor for the kids. So the kids actually interview her and 1 more local farmers and the local fishermen, then create this their presentation. And CHIYA is focused on the soundscape of mapping Osaka-jima, not by visual art. I'm taking care of the visual art, but we also need to consider what kind of a sound can represent the culture of the island, the losing identity, the uniqueness of Kyungjae. Back to the framework, it's art, education, and island. Very easy to understand. First, it must be socially engaged kind of education. Also, we're using the creative geography concept of deep mapping with the artist book. So it's a combination. It's not just deep mapping. Without artist book, there's no way to present to people. For 13 years old kids, make an understandable presentation for adults. So that's why we have to combine artist book and deep mapping. Therefore, HIGA, the school already selected their SDG indicator. Number 2, climate change. 13, 14, 15 is local food system, life above the water and life under the water, and sustainable community. So for all these elements, we had an all 3 days workshop. I will not introduce too much by language because I create a 15 minutes documentary film, but I will just show you the final part of the project. Okay, the artist book I have to mention because this is what I learned from a creative tourism conference back to Azores in 2017. It's a very cool way to mapping your travel experiences in a travel book. But
the history of the artist book can be really traced back to Dadaism after they try to really break down a concept of book and move it to an installation, basically. It's not a book, so to speak. And it can be as creative as you want. There is no rules because the computer two-dimensional screen kind of really limits your creativity and your presentation.
So ours books.
I learned this from MIT laboratory.
But here at MIT, what we
so they really provide a lot of good examples for students to
it's a
follow.
contemporary form of art.
Yeah, you can really make a book like that.
Or a group of artists take the codex or book form and just play with it however they'd like. That could be in form, structure, or content. Artist books can provide another way in to material, can provide another way to engage with dialogue or with historical events or with scientific discoveries in a visual and tactile way that can be lacking in the classroom. I'm looking to collaborate with faculty and bringing them into the classroom and getting students to really just experience them. Because I can talk about them all day long, but if you don't see them, if you don't touch them, if you don't play with them yourself, then I could just talk and it wouldn't mean anything. Because you see all of the work that the artists have put into it and all of the care and all of the thought, and it's really just so detailed that it's amazing. It's indescribable. These books are pieces of art, but also really influential pieces in the dialogue of society. And the potential for them is unlimited. So students can create their own artist books. They can make their own works based on whatever matters to them right now. Really, the possibilities are endless.
Okay, based on this template, I think this is really cool because we want to divide the student into more than 9 groups, and each of them can create a completely unique book. Some group even destroy the book, make a map. Yeah, so I provide a lot of examples for them what they can do with a white paper and a scissors. The creativity is very unlimited in compare with our presentation in the computer. So the concept of deep mapping is also easy to understand. It's not just one layer of map in our daily life. It's actually multi-layered history and reinterpretation of the island. For example, Osaka-Kyungjae. Then we travel in Osaka-Kyungjae, we know the history from local people, we add a layer. It's like an onion. Then we also know the geography. A lot of under the sea part story from the fishermen. So it's a multiple layered kind of concept. It's a storytelling. It's very easy to understand for kids. It also can be complex for scholars as well. Then even kindergarten kids can do hand sketches. So therefore, you just give them a topic. There is an online participant can admit. Thank you. I didn't choose the SDG, we choose with the teacher together because we believe this 4 indicator is enough for students. They do not need to follow all the indicators, but at least they need to select one for their team. Because on an island environment, climate change is number 1 to impact the food. So they are highly related because islands are resource-restrained communities under the context of depopulation. Therefore, both living creatures on land, also under the water, are quite important. So what's the special part about Osaka-Kyungjae? We know Osaka-Kyungjae is a self-government body without sharing their community with any nearby municipality. Also, they have their special charming onsen hotel and as well as a blueberry farm, organic things going on the island. The last part is CHIYA's, his profession is music and conducting. So we also encourage students during 3D workshop, during their travel, recording all the sound they encountered on the island. So I don't think I will give too details. We traveled to so many places, including the soy sauce factory we traveled yesterday. So they also record some sound of chikada and the bottling of the soy sauce. Then we have a 3D plan. Every day they visit something, then next day they do some group work. Yeah. So the research part of this project is also mixed method. It's including 30 questionnaire, 20 interview, also 3D observation, and also planning the whole workshop. And
students engage with the real social problem and also try to solve the real social problem. So therefore, the social part is mapping with the artistic mapping for sustainability education, and the social problem is they have to design a proposal for island revitalization. So as I mentioned, they interviewed 3 professions. One is a researcher, one is a local farmer, one is a local fisherman. So they really match with these 3 SDG indicators. Then they have a group discussion. Each team has to decide which indicator they want to apply on their artist book. After they also follow some example provided by the teaching assistant from Hiroshima University as well as Tsukuba University. We have 13 teaching assistants during this workshop. Then they also visit the local places and try to figure out what kind of topic they want, what kind of art book they want to present, in which method, even how many topics they want to talk about. So 3 days is really, really long, but this kids really enjoy the island as well as creating their very creative, the most creative thing I ever see in university campus, but I see in Haiga, in that middle school. So I will just show you a final outcome of this workshop.
Yeah, maybe around 3 o'clock. It's full. Understand how bad it could affect our planet.
Yeah, we basically interviewed all of them during the workshop, including the teaching assistant.
Sustainability too, because it's continuing on and on forever.
That's the sound installation part. The soil slope fall and the summer of island Chicago. Okay, we have a lot of findings, but I don't have a time. But basically, that's the outcome of this book. We can see how students interview the professionals, then they get the feedback, also match with their travel experiences. They reinterpret it into the artistic way. And also each group also provided tons of data for us to analyze how this workshop affects the student, their understanding for both English, art, as well as the island education parts. So in general, from questionnaire data, we found out female students, very interesting. Female students more enjoy this workshop through the artistic creation part. But also for the Japanese student who has lower English communication skills will benefit from this workshop more. That's some statistic finding. But in general, mixed method really shows this combination of creative geography, field study, sustainability, and art education really can work well for at least middle school students. I really want to bring this kind of method to university campus. I think it works with the kindergarten level, and middle school it definitely works with university students and professors. Okay, in the end, I think that's it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. So, questions, please.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm Yan from Hong Kong Polytechnic University. And also with Dr. Chu's kind of help, we had a very interesting tour yesterday. Also visiting this Haida school, and I think it is very kind of attractive and also interesting, excellent methods to really know the environment and community. And I wonder, normally, which problem of the students address most after that?
Thank you very much. I think it's a good question. It really depends on the group. Some groups really enjoy the island while making art and talking to each other. Also, they have a club activity in the evening. But some students really struggle. For the student with lack of creativity, you can see how can we really finish before the deadline? Because we provide 10 pages, but they do not require to finish 10 pages. If just 4 pages is fine. But they really struggling to fill in out all the blank page, that at the last day. But I think 90% of the team really enjoyed it because it's not just learning English in class or traveling the island with a book the tour, then write a report. That's typical education we are dealing with, but they really enjoy it. I think one more thing I observed is they really rely on digital technology. Every kid travel with an iPad, and it's really painful for them to actually remapping their knowledge into paper. But I found this is very interesting. They use their iPads, do the sketch first, then they paint second. But I think this is a way to encourage kids move away from digital device, really immerse with the island and community. Thank you.